The Shir today is dedicated in memory of Chaim ben Yosef, and that's David Fialkov's father, Zichron Levracha, should be an Aliyas Neshama. We're going to study today Likutei Halachos, Choshen Mishpat, Hilchos Pikadon, Perek Daled, and we'll start with Halacha Chaf Aleph. The title of today's Shir is the connection between Korach, followed immediately by Chukas HaParah, Parah Adumah, and in the same parsha we have the Mei Merivah, and we'll talk a little bit about Mashiach. Zeh bechinas Parah Adumah. We touched on this last week. What is unique about Parah Adumah, and why is it called a chok? And lama nismecha Parah Adumah lemachlokes Korach. Why do we find immediately contiguous to the presentation of Korach, we find the Parsha Parah Adumah? What is the connection? And he quotes a psikta, Lama nismecha Parshas Parah, Achar Machlokes Korach. So it seems that Korach did not recognize the chok of Parah Adumah. But the question is why? What is it about Korach and his rebellion? And why is that connected to denying the chok of Parah Adumah? Parah Adumah, says Rabbi Nassan, is very unique. In the constellation of Karbanos, we don't find what we call a Karbanos Avodas Chutz. All the Avodah is done inside the Mikdash. In the case of Parah Adumah, however, all the Avodah is done outside the Mikdash, and that's called Avodas Chutz. Now, this concept of Chutz is going to take on a very significant meaning, Chutz, and we'll see that as we go along. What is the power, the unique power of Parah Adumah? And by the way, on the side, we'll mention that the Sorah HaMishtalech on Yom Kippur is also an Avodas Chutz, but that is integrated with the Avodas Pnim of the Sorah Hashem. Here, we have in Parah Adumah the entire Avodah from beginning to end is Bachutz. And let's talk a little bit now about Tumas Mes. In the constellation of Tumos, Tumas Mes is very high, if not the highest, in its severity, in its harshness. In fact, if someone comes in contact with a person who died, then that contact engenders the status of an Avatuma, and he could be Nitami or Devakem. We're talking about a very severe, high-powered Tuma because of Mes. And why is that so? So by way of introduction, we have two concepts that are mashlim, they complement one of the other. There's a concept called chitzonius, and there's a concept called pnimius. Chitzonius reflects on this physical world that's limited, that's finite, it's made of carbon, it's here, and then it's gone. But there's another element, which is even more important, that's called pnimius. Pnimius refers to the soul of man, the neshama of man, that is eternal and is not limited in any physical way. The combination thereof, of like Vayipach B'Apav Nishmas Chaim, the guf, which is chitzoni, together with the pnim, that's what creates life itself. Chiyus is the integration of chomer and ruach, or chitzonius and pnimius. In fact, Rabbi Nassan presents the concept of seichel as the highest level of the achievement of man. What is this seichel? What is this comprehension that we strive to achieve? Says Rabbi Nassan, seichel is when I look out at the world, every object therein, every experience, every encounter, and I see within it divinity. I am Megale, I reveal Kvod Shamayim, the glory of God. B'chol drachecha da'ehu. We know God in every way, in every experience, in every encounter. Imagine if we could achieve that high level of seichel, where everything that we see, feel, and experience, every encounter is uplifting because we discover that which is ne'elam, that which is hidden, and that which is chitzoni, and we reveal the pnimius, we reveal the Elokus that's in every object, in every experience. That's the highest level of Seichel. And now let's say a few words about a topic that I don't like to talk about. It's quite uncomfortable, and that is death. Death creates the most horrendous havoc in our lives. Each and every one of us are destined to die. And it generates grief and mourning, the loss of a person. Death is the tragedy of man. What is death? Death is the ultimate separation between chitzonius and pnimius. When the neshama leaves the guf, what we're left with is a physical, material, finite corpse which has no pnim to it. And that's why tumas mes is the most severe of all tumas. Because within the hierarchy, within the constellation of tmeim, of tumos, mes is the most shocking, it's the most profound. When you end up with removing pnim, and all you have is chutz, all you have is a body that's going to decompose, that reflects on the lowest level that man can achieve. It's not even an achievement, really. It's the lowest level of man in the sense that it's the opposite of what man was meant to do and be as an integration of chitzonius and pnimius. All that comes to a halt and a termination with a total separation between chitzonius, which is now the physical body, the corpse, and pnimius, which is the neshama that goes up into the world of infinity. And any contact with the dead will generate the most intense level of tumah, because that is tumah. Tumah is the separation of chitzonius and pnimius, and that's what's going to happen as a result of misa. Here we begin to understand the meaning of chok, zos chukas haTorah. Why is Parah Adumah a chok? Meaning it defies our rational understanding. Because Parah Adumah contains within it purification, tahara, from the most impossible, profound tumah of tumas mes. It's beyond our comprehension how we can imagine the body, the physical body after death, being restored to its original state of an integration of pnim and chutz, that the neshama of a person will now re-enter the guf at the moment of tchiyas hamesim. That's something that's a pure chok. And the tahara of Parah Adumah is indicative of the fact that, yes, even after death, we can have a tahara process, a purification. We can imagine a situation of tchiyas hamesim, that the pnim and the neshama will again re-enter into the guf. And that defies our understanding. How could this happen? Once the guf has become deteriorated, there's been degeneration of the guf. At that point, the guf is basically lost. It's gone. And yet the Parah Adumah comes with its chok and says, no, there's something left in the guf. The Zohar calls it a kusta de chiyusa. Even after death, there's some vestige of life in the corpse, in the guf. I mean, just al derech hatzachus, we have a mitzvah of malava malka after Shabbos. Some say that the malava malka is meant to feed the luz bone. That's the bone that won't disintegrate after death, and the body will be reconstructed from that luz bone. But whatever it is, there is inherent in the concept and the mitzvah of Parah Adumah the possibility of being metar chitzonius, because again, the avoda of the Parah Adumah is pure chutz. It's absolutely outside the confines of the Beis Hamikdash. It's chutz. And when the body decomposes, it's because of what's called the achizas ha-chitzonios, these external forces that are chitzoni, that are physical, are coming to sort of attack the guf. Hence the disintegration of the body. And when the body degenerates, you're looking at a phenomenon that is generated by the chitzonius. And now comes the Parah Adumah, dafka because it's chitzonius. And by the way, it's Adumah, the redness of the Parah Adumah represents a concept of din, of sitra achra, of the most intense and profound desires of a person that try to bring him down. And dafka in that state, reflecting chutz, that's where the Parah Adumah, in a magical way, beyond human comprehension, can engender Tara, can give us a sense of faith and optimism that there will be a Tchiyas HaMesim, and that the Neshama, the Pnim, will return to the Chitz, to the Guf. All this is beyond the comprehension of the human rational mind. Hence, we begin to understand the Psikta that we began with. Why is the rebellion of Korach presented by the Torah contiguous to Chok, to Chukas HaTorah, to the Parah Adumah? Because it's this very concept of Chok that Korach found intolerable. Korach was a Pikeach. Korach was a first-class intellect. He probably had Phi Beta Kappa on his coat. He probably had 1,600 college boards. He was brilliant. And he understood that he had reached the highest level of human comprehension of Das. There was nothing incomprehensible. There was nothing beyond human understanding. And that's why he rebelled against the Torah and, in effect, against Moshe Rabbeinu as well. Moshe would be the interpreter of the Torah, and Korach would reject all those attempts to interpret the Torah because Korach, believed that his intellectual understanding was superior to anyone, including that of Moshe Rabbeinu. And then he would join together, he would gather together Pishtan, and he would ask whether there's tzitzis for Pishtan, it's a beged shekulo, tcheles, and so forth and so on. All the questions that came from his intellectual understanding and analysis of the mitzvahs, because in his mind, he rejected the concept of Torah. What concept of Torah is so central in order to arrive at the concept of Chok? Remember, we spoke about Seichel Elyon, that highest level of Seichel, that I can look at everything and encounter every experience and reveal the Elokus, the divinity. How do I do that? By what method? What instruments? What vessel is at my disposal to be able to achieve that goal? To be able to see and reveal in every experience, in every object, the Elokus, the divinity, the Ve'ata Mechayes Kulam. It's only the Torah. There's nothing but the Torah. The Torah is the Taryag Mitzvahs, Istakel Baraisa Bara Alma. The Torah is the blueprint for how to achieve Seichel Elyon, the highest level of Seichel. And is this Torah that Korach rejects? In Korach's opinion, everything has to be subject. Keep in mind that Korach was motivated by his gaiva, his sense of self, of his conceit. He was full of himself. He was insulted by the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu took over the leadership, and he felt that Moshe had usurped the mantle of leadership. He was upset with the fact that Aaron was appointed the Kohen, and he was left out. He was upset about the fact that Moshe was giving us mitzvos, many of which we cannot understand. They're all chukim. And the chok is antithetical to the philosophy of Korach. In Korach's Weltanschauung, in his worldview, there is no such thing as a chok. It's all subject to human analysis. He could not tolerate saying, well, there's something in the Torah that we can't understand, and yet it's part of the fabric and the framework of our very religion. That's intolerable for Korah. So the idea is Zos Chukas HaTorah, and as we said before, the most profound chok that defies human comprehension is that of the Parah Adumah, because the Parah Adumah is going to teach us that there can be a reunification of Pnimius with Chitzonius even post-mortem, even after the death of a person, that's defying, that's intellectually defying any rational understanding, and that's antithetical to Korach because that's a chok. Now, if you have the pages that I gave out, and I would like you to appreciate, as I do, the office here that does such a wonderful job, and I send them these pages as an attachment, and they print it out. Thank you so much to the entire staff here at the OU. What a wonderful institution. And they should continue in the way until Mashiach comes and even beyond. He writes here in the 4th paragraph, Ze ikar habechira. Man is not given this seichel as a given gift, gratis. If he were, there would be no bechira. If man had been endowed with this seichel to see Elokus wherever he turned, then there's no challenge to man to reveal Elokus. God wanted the Torah to be given down in this world where Elokus, divinity, is concealed. And that was B'dafka what Hashem wanted, that we, through our choice and making the free but correct choices, we would reveal that which is concealed, the Elokus. So we don't have that seichel. It's something that we have to work towards. Through our freedom of choice, we choose to strive for seichel and reach that highest level of seichel. And here we turn to the 2nd page. And he says the following, that death is only a temporary termination of the unification between Pnimius and Chitzonis. It's only temporary. V'amech kulam tzadikim. Tzadikim b'misasam kuyim chayim. And ki kol avodaseinu v'giyaseinu b'shvil tachlis shuliachar misa kishenizke lokum b'tchias hamesim. V'oz yeh ikar kibul aschar. So we have to understand, and it's one of the tenets of our faith, there'll be tchias hamesim. And all our avoda, all our yigia, all our tircha in this world is to guarantee that tzadikim b'misasam kuyim chayim. We're still connected to those pnimius spiritual elements. And at the end of time, after Tchias HaMesim will be Ikar Kibul Schar, will have the reward. Hayom Lasosim L'mocha L'kabel Scharim Ki Oz. Then Nasig B'Shlemus Kol Masha Over B'Zeolam will begin to understand retroactively all the events of our life. Every single nuance and detail will now become crystal clear. It's all part of a divine program. Ki Anu Ma'aminim Shafil Yachar Misa. Even though Misa means the pirud, the separation between Pnimius and Chitzonius, Nefesh Me'aguf, but nevertheless, Eina pirud Gomer Liolam. This is not an eternal period, Chas v'Shalom. This is not going to go on and on. It's only Lefi Shah. It's only for a temporary period of time until the time of the resurrection of the Tchiyah. And not only that, says Rabbi Nosson, Afilu b'yeis hamisa kodem atchiyah. Even when man is in the morgue, so to speak, he's just a dead body. Nevertheless, nishar ba'guf kista de chiyusa, there's a very small measure of vestige of chiyus, as the Zohar tells us. And not only that, after resurrection, there'll be a tremendous chibur between the most profound integration of Pnimius and Chitzonius. Dafkal Yidei Misa. And that's why Rabbi Meir is famous for saying, Vayarol Ekimis Koshivine Tov Ma'od Tov Moseh Misa. What could be Tov Ma'od about Misa? What could be good about death? But the answer is, HaMisa LiYisrael Aksherim, for a good upstanding Jew, Misa is Rak Shena. It's like going to sleep. And what do we gain from sleep? When a person goes to sleep, he gets a recharge of his energies, his batteries are recharged. There's a hischadshus of the nefesh with new powers and energy forces, v'nischazek yoser, it becomes even more strong and powerful than it was originally. Mibchinas chadoshim lebekarim. Hamisa shemachmas hachet shel adam harishon we can't understand the ultimate purpose of death and the impact of death. Al yidei hamisa az yashuv ha'ofer la'aretz v'yiyeh haruach tashuv. But yizdakeh haguf bi'ofar. There will be a cleansing, refining process of the corpse, of the dead body in the offer. And upstairs, the neshama of that particular person who died is being recreated with new energies. V'al zemer amezes mitzas Parah Adumah shichuka gedola yefshel asiga. Al kol panim al yidei mitzvah zos shel Parah Adumah neroim she'efshel litoyer afilu mitumas mes. Even tumas mes, the most severe of all tumas, lends itself to tara through the Parah Adumah ki efer para mitaheres. Ki apara maaseh bachutz, where we said there was achizas hachitzonim, and now through the Parah Adumah megarshim hachitzonim, ad shemekosheres gam tachlis hachitzonius el apnimius. So Parah Adumah represents the ultimate connection and integration of chitzonius and pnimius, and its mitayer tumas mes. The Korach b'machlekuso pagam b'chol se ki cholak al Moshe shu klal Torah. Now, the Torah, as we said before, will give us the ability to integrate Pnim and Chutz, to discover the Pnim and the Chutz. But Moshe Rabbeinu rejects the Torah of Moshe. Korach rejects the Torah of Moshe. Vayikach Korach, and Uncle says this paleg, he cuts himself off. That means he rejects the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. He separates palga. Palga means you take one half and one half by separating between the two. And Korach was separating between the Pnimius and the Chitzonis. Ki kafar be'ikar, he denied. V'lo hemen, he didn't believe. She'yecholim, it's possible, l'kasher, hachitzonius el ha'pnimius, al-yidei Torah ha'mitzvah. And he goes on here, Rabbi Nosson, to explain some of the psychological reasons and challenges of Korach, all sorts of taivus and gasus and gaiva and whatever. Korach pogam bazeh cholak al Moshe v'Aaron rotzel lios kohen upogam ba'tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means when I admit that I can't understand. It's beyond my comprehension. Ki rotzel lahasig haseichel, he wanted to achieve that high level of seichel b'litzimtzum, without subjecting himself or subjugating himself to the Torah and to Moshe Rabbeinu. Vayidei haras sichlo legamri, completely undermined his seichel. V'chilek ha'pnimius ve'achitzonius me'achar shelo hemin ba'Torah. Al keino ya'on, so where's the midah keneged midah, that he was swallowed up by the ground? Ki kach roilo, that's appropriate for him. Ki herulo mashe pogam sherotza lachlo kachitzonius va'pnimius v'oz b'chayav kori mes v'b'chinas rishoyim b'chayim kuya mesiv. Now, I'm going to do something that's a little bit atypical for this Sunday morning shir that I give every week. And I always say about myself that I'm trying to achieve the 3 B's: Berzon, brisk, and Breslov. the 3 B's. So you're all familiar with Brisk. And I was not aware until this past Thursday of a lecture that the Rav gave, apparently Rav Soloveitchik, my Brisker Rebbe, many, many, many years ago. The summary of this lecture appears in a book called Misores Harav, Chumash Misores Harav, which is a Chumash with commentaries based on the teachings of Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, and it's published by the OU, so it's appropriate to quote it here. And it was put together as a commentary by Arnie Lustiger, published again by the OU Press. Our goal here is to figure out the connection not only between Korach and the Parah Adumah, but also the parasha of the Mei Merivah, and as we said at the outset, Mashiach. These 4 topics seem so unrelated one to the other, especially where do we fit Mei Merivah, that very complex sugya of the so-called, in quotation marks, chet of Moshe, called the Mei Merivah. However, just on this past Thursday, I discovered in this sefer called Mesoras Harav for Sefer Bamidbar, and if you're interested, it's on page 162, on the pasuk Vayomer Hashem el Moshe v'el Aaron, in the aftermath of the Mei Merivah, Yan lo hemantim bi latisheni li'enei b'nei Yisrael lachein lo saviu es hakahol hazeh el haaretz asher nasati lachem. Hema Mei Merivah, etc. God decrees that Moshe would die in the sand dunes of the Midbar, and he would not enter into the land of Israel. Let's try to understand this. After all, who is Moshe Rabbeinu? Moshe Rabbeinu is the greatest Navi that ever lived. The Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva writes that even the Melech HaMashiach will not have the endowment of prophecy of Nevuah that matches up to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was meant in the original plan of the Almighty to be the Mashiach. He had all the qualifications. He was meant to lead the people into the land of Israel. He would enter the land, and that would be the period of Mashiach. There would not be any golios, any exiles. Do you hear me, Rabbos? No exiles. Because Moshe Rabbeinu himself would have been the Mashiach. And here in this pasuk, in which Hashem declares, Lo saviu sakol azela oretz Hashem nasati. You will not enter the land, you will die. Why? Because of some chet of Mei Merivah, which we don't even know what that chet is? Are you going to tell me that because of that sin, Moshe Rabbeinu lost his status? He wasn't worthy of being Mashiach? Imagine Jewish history. How it would have changed. What it would be like if Moshe had entered into the land of Israel and declared the commonwealth of Mashiach, the ultimate redemption. There would have been no exiles. All of Jewish history of the exiles and the pogroms and the anti-Semitism and the destruction. One golus after the other. the Inquisition in Spain and the Holocaust in the 20s, all that wouldn't have happened. It could have been totally avoided if the original plan of Hashem would have come to fruition and Moshe would have entered into the land as Mashiach. And the most baffling question is why? Why was this plan derailed? Was Moshe not worthy of being the Melech HaMashiach? He had all the qualities. He superseded the Mashiach. He was meant to be Mashiach. I will quote to you from this Sefer Mesoras Harav. Many theories have been advanced by our commentators concerning Moshe's death in the Midbar. None of the answers satisfy. It is humanly impossible to grasp the rationality of Moshe's death. Death in general is beyond rational comprehension, and Moses' death in particular. Zos chukas haTorah. Emphasize the word chukah. No matter what the reason for Moses' death, one basic truth stands out. Moshe suffered on account of the children of Israel. And Rav Soloveitchik proves this with 3 psukim in Tanakh. I don't have a Tanakh here in front of me. If anyone has a Tanakh, please bring it forward. The first pasuk is from Sefer Dvarim, Perek Gimel, pasuk Chaf Hei. I'll read to you the English translation. I don't have the original. Pray, let me cross over and see the good land that is on the other side of the Jordan. This good mountain and Lebanon. That's in Pasuk Chaf Hei, Pasuk Chaf Vav. Moshe Rabbeinu adds, but the Lord was angry with me because of you, and he did not listen to my prayers. Because of you, biglalchem. Moshe suffers on account of Israel. Additionally, we read in Dvarim, Perek Aleph, Pasuk Lamed Zayin, the Lord was also angry with me because of you, saying, neither will you go there. Again, a third time in Tehillim, Perek Kuvav, capital number 106, they provoked God by the waters of Merivah, and Moshe suffered because of them. Over and over again. Moshe was worthy of being Mashiach. Moshe was meant to enter into the land, but because of them. What does that mean, because of them? It's not the fault of the Jewish people. Moshe Rabbeinu made some mistake. We don't know what it was exactly at Mei Merivah. And here the Rav has a major breakthrough. I call it a revolution of sorts. Had the people possessed a love for Moshe Rabbeinu, similar to the love of Moshe Rabbeinu feeling for them, they would have torn the decree of God into shreds. That's how powerful the tefillos of Am Yisrael would have been, but they were not mispalel for Moshe Rabbeinu. When Moshe was told that he would not enter the land of Israel, Moshe himself, as a one-man show, pleaded for forgiveness. Had the people joined him in prayer with a love for Moshe, the Holy One would have been forced to be responded. Forced, that's a very heavy word. But they did not join. Thus we read that with tears in his eyes, Moshe told them, V'eschanan al Hashem, I entreated the Lord, saying, pray, let me cross over and see the good land on the other side of the Jordan. Rescind your decree, God, and allow me to enter into Eretz Yisrael. But it doesn't say, Vayischanan, or Vanischanan. It says Va'eschanan. I prayed alone. No one else joined me in prayer. And therefore God became angry, not because of Moshe Rabbeinu, but because of Lemanchem, because of you, because of the people of Israel. Lo saviu es hakahol hazeh el haaretz. We read the parshios from Bamidbar, in the middle of Bamidbar till the end of Dvarim, that deal with the last months of Moshe Rabbeinu's life, the last month. We're confronted with the tragedy of a teacher who is too great for his people, of a master who is too exalted, too deep, too profound for his generation. The tragedy of a Rebbe who has boundless knowledge, unlimited inspiration, sweeping erudition, is great in every respect, but whom his generation does not appreciate. Moshe dies because his nation was not worthy of him. Don't think that Mashiach is a one-sided deal. You have someone who has the greatness and the qualities of Mashiach, that guarantees it. No, it's got to be also the Am, the people of Israel. And the nation of Israel was not able to appreciate Moshe Rabbeinu. The problem is not in Moshe, it's in the people. And here Rav Soloveitchik develops a beautiful idea. At Har Sinai, the people made the golden calf. Moshe Rabbeinu argues in front of Hashem to defend the people. Oh, why, O Lord, should you be angry? Why should your anger be kindled against your people who have you brought out and up from the land of Mitzrayim? What exactly was Moshe Rabbeinu's argument? What do you mean, why should you be angry? What kind of question is that? They just worshipped Avodah Zarah. The Medrash in Shmos Rabbah fills in the missing piece of the puzzle. What was Moshe's argument? What do you expect of the people? Their background is pagan, having lived for hundreds of years in Egypt. They reached, I'm just adding this on my own, the Memtes Shari Tumah. They have not been retrained or re-educated in the practice of the morality of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It takes time, Moshe argued. You can't send a child to a reform school and hope that overnight he's reformed. Moshe argued that to reform and rehabilitate the people, to teach them new mores and values and virtues, that's the great challenge. Imagine, they have not been re-educated or retrained. Moshe argues that in order to reform and rehabilitate the people, oh wow, we need a whole training period. It's got to last for years and decades and who knows, maybe millennium. And this means that the generation of Yotzei Mitzrayim could not be considered the disciples of Moshe because they grew up and developed in Mitzrayim. That alien culture, idolatrous, immoral culture of Mitzrayim injected into the Yotzei Mitzrayim, they weren't able to appreciate Moshe Rabbeinu. But now, fast forward 38 years. We're at the end of the 40-year period. All the Yotzei Mitzrayim had died. As the Gemara tells us in Tainus, every night on Tisha B'Av, every Tisha B'Av night, each person would dig his own grave. So now where are we? We're at Mei Merivah. This is a generation that was educated from birth by Moshe Rabbeinu. And yet, at Mei Merivah, they still engaged in the same arguments as their fathers had used, with the same language that their fathers had used 40 years earlier in Refidim, in the desert of Sinai. Why have you brought the congregation of the Lord to this desert so that we and our livestock should perish here? Why have you taken out of Mitzrayim to bring us this evil place? What defense argument could Moshe possibly advance at Mei Merivah at the end of the 40-year period? What? Could he say, well, I'll defend them, God, because they had to be retrained, they weren't raised and molded by me? They were molded, chas v'sholem, by the tomb of Mitzrayim? Could Moshe Rabbeinu say that at this juncture of Mei Merivah, when again the people are repeating the same arguments, the same rebellious arguments, to venomously undermine Moshe Rabbeinu, for having brought them into the Midbar? Can Moshe Rabbeinu now stand in front of the Eibishter and say to him, I pray, God, these people have to be retrained. Be patient. No, they don't have to be retrained. They were raised and molded by Moshe Rabbeinu. So Moshe Rabbeinu is there standing with his mouth dropped, without any argument, without any defense argument in his mouth. The Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Yotzei Mitzrayim had all died by now. Bnei Yisrael were the Boei Haaretz, the generation educated by Moshe, and yet at Mei Merivah they still engaged in the same argument. The failure of Moshe Rabbeinu to enter into the land changed Jewish history. Had he entered into Eretz Yisrael, the people never would have been exiled. Moshe would have been anointed as the Mashiach. Jewish history would have found its ultimate fulfillment and realization if Bnei Yisrael had proven themselves worthy of communing with Moshe, meaning love for Moshe, of being his disciples, if they would only be receptive. If they would have had the receptive intellectual and emotional capacity to absorb Torah's Moshe, then immediately Moshe would have entered and conquered the promised land. No power, no matter how great, could have exiled the Jews. Moshe Rabbeinu was ready to be Mashiach. However, the Messianic era depends on the people. They have to be ready as well. If Moshe's message had had the necessary impact on the people, this would have been a generation that heralded the Mashiach, because his students, instead of behaving like slaves who went free, the previous generation, the Messianic era, which was postponed for such a long time, would be brought about by the Boya Oretz. But tragically, this didn't happen, and Moshe would have to die before he'd enter the land. He would not cross the Jordan. He did not receive the crown of Mashiach. Klal Yisrael would now have to wait for the Mashiach. Jewish history would be complex and tragic. The Adam ki Yomas ba'oel in this parsha refers to the Adam of Moshe, the greatest of all men. Moshe we will suffer the consequences. Only when the people are ready to fully commit themselves to Moshe Rabbeinu's teachings is he accepted as the teacher by the entire nation. When all are willing to be his disciples, then we know that the will and the hour of redemption has arrived. And if Korach represents the rebellion of one individual against Moshe Rabbeinu, then Mei Merivah represents the rebellion of that entire generation of Boy Haaretz, the young Adar, against Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu will not become the Mashiach. Yiratzon may it be his will that we be zocheh to have that level of admiration, of recognition, of acknowledgement of the great tzaddikim, of Torah's Moshe. And then when we're worthy of that, then Amir Hashem, God will reveal the Mashiach Tzidkenu at the time of the Gula Shlema. B'mheir of Yameinu Amen. Thank you. Shavua Tov and Chodesh Tov.